Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the writing is sort of everything, right? Like you kind of can fix plot holes, but if the writing is
so some readers love that, and some readers are like, but I wanted more of this. So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. Joining us today is literary agent and head of books at Madeline Milburn Agency, Olivia Maidment. Hello.
Hello, hi. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Thanks for being on. I'm excited to be chatting with you. Let's start with you. You've been at Madeline Milburn since 2020, so 5 years. But am I right in thinking you've been in publishing longer than that?
Yeah, so I started in publishing in August of 2016. Straight out of coming from university, I went straight into working in literary agencies. I actually started working with an internship at Madeline Milburn, where I worked for a month, only a month, and then went off and then kind of came back.
Gone full circle?
Yes, very much.
Did you always want to work in publishing? Was that kind of the direction that you wanted to take after you'd finished university?
No, to be honest, not at all, really. I didn't really know anything about it. I didn't really consider it as an industry. I did English and classics as a kind of joint honours, and I thought I wanted to go into law, so I was going to do the law conversion course. But I did a few kind of internships in that, and I realised it wasn't really for me. But the university that I was going to be doing my law conversion at, they had this programme where you could kind of basically, if you wanted to change what you were doing, you could do something else. So I was going to then go and do the publishing masters because I just looked at their list of programs and I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. But then I got an internship with Madeline Milburn, and from there I got a job. So I never ended up doing the masters or kind of any after kind of university postgraduate stuff. But that kind of led me into this world, and yeah, I love it so much.
The internship, that would be like an agency assistant kind of role, helping out around the agency, I would guess.
Yeah, just kind of very entry level interning. Yeah. So I did a month at Madeline Milburn back when it was a kind of much more boutique, smaller company back in 2016. And from there, I went on to a 6-month internship at the Blair Partnership. And they offered me a full-time role there as an assistant for their agents, which was amazing.
Okay. Did you, I've spoken to a few agents, and it's funny how many agents got into publishing and didn't really know either about the existence or what a literary agent did. Presumably you knew once you'd started the internship, but like ahead of that, when you kind of got accepted to this internship, was it a learning curve? Did you kind of know what an agent was or what they did in the industry?
No, absolutely. I'd never heard of one, but I read an interview. And it was someone talking about how agenting was the marriage of kind of business and books. And like I'd always loved reading, as with like everyone in publishing, because it was a massive passion for my whole life. Mm-hmm. And I read this interview where an agent was talking about, because I was reading a lot from people working in publishing at the time when I decided to switch from law into it. They were talking about how it was the perfect marriage of business and books, how it's kind of like you're using the creative side of like editing, of kind of hunting for new authors, for new talent, but also career planning, kind of legal contracts. And that really excited me because I didn't feel ready to kind of give up those kind of technical hard skills either. So for me, agenting felt like a really exciting role because it let me do both of those things. It seemed like, for me when I was 21, it just seemed like the dream to go into. And I think it has really suited me. It's
definitely a role that wears many hats. Yeah. You touched on a couple there, but it's even more than that because like there's so much of a social aspect to it as well. The relationship between you and each of your authors, and like being a middleman sometimes between an editor and an author, and all of that stuff all wrapped into one, I guess.
For sure, like it's so multifaceted, and I think that you have to really embrace that. You have to be someone who's willing to kind of be doing a day that is not really cohesive in the things that you're doing because you're managing so many different projects, and so many different projects are at different stages. Like you'll have your kind of your debut authors who you're just kind of doing some early editing with, or you're just getting them out on submission for the first time. You'll have your more established authors who are dealing with different kind of challenges and obstacles and things to celebrate. So it's a job where you have to be able to kind of dive in and out of different things very quickly, which I think is kind of part of the fun and the buzz of it. And and makes you feel really excited about coming to work every day because it's so varied.
Exciting. There's always something new on the horizon. So you are obviously a literary agent, but you also hold the title of head of books at Madeleine Melbourne. What does that role entail?
Sure. So the role of head of books, again, is quite a multifaceted role. So one thing is kind of providing guidance for the other agents if there's maybe something that they need to deal with, maybe strategically or a contractual issue. And then also it's things like helping to develop what our agency's response will be to things like, for example, like AI has been a big hot topic across the industry. So I work with the directors to work out kind of what our agency's stance will be, making sure that we've got initiatives in place to help our authors through challenges like that. Any kind of big things that come up in the industry, like I'll be part of those conversations to work out what we as an agency are kind of, what we're going to do to handle those things. And yeah, just kind of making sure that our books department everyone's feeling flourishing and happy.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So it's like it's a leadership role, basically. You're, just making sure everything's ticking along and that everyone's happy. Yeah. Like you say, happy and doing their thing. Okay.
Yeah. It's a leadership role in the company, basically.
Okay, great. Let's get into the agenting side of things and talk about your list and kind of your work in that space. Broadly, you represent literary, upmarket, and book club fiction. Does that about cover your kind of list?
It does. And I've recognised, I was out in New York last week with my colleague, just going around all the different publishers and pitching our lists and telling them about exciting projects that are coming up for both of us. And I think I realised that there's kind of probably three main areas to my list. So there's kind of the big, sweeping, kind of mass appeal literary novels that I love so much, kind of like really powerful and emotive and full of texture. Things like authors like, I guess, like Andrew O'Hagan, Ben Evaristo, Barbara Kingsolver, the types of people that I love to read and the types of books I'd love to work with. And then there's a kind of more accessible literary millennial readership, contemporary fiction that I work on a lot. I love books in that kind of space, looking at questions of identity, maybe that are a bit more zeitgeisty, maybe with a really singular voice or hook. And then also I represent books that are in a kind of literate market space that blends with kind of shades of genre. So maybe that's like literary speculative, literary horror. I'm loving kind of like literary thrillers at the moment. I'm really looking for an exciting literary thriller. So I think those are kind of the three main areas that I work in.
Okay. When, just for clarity here, because sometimes I think I have a vague sense of what some of these genres are. But I think sometimes I speak to people and then I think to myself, maybe my view of what this genre is describing is not quite the same as theirs. When you say literary, what's the kind of general idea, like the general kind of definition of what you're looking when you talk about like a literary thriller or a literary horror?
I think it really depends on who you ask. I think that question is so difficult to answer because depending on where someone sits in the market, they'll consider things to be, for some people, something is only literary when it's maybe extremely literary, maybe more experimental. For some people, it's things that are just not very openly, clearly commercial. In terms of when I'm talking about genre blending and genre branding with kind of literary fiction, I think I'm just looking for stuff that's more grounded in the human parts of the story. So like a good example of that, Carla by Colin Walsh was a kind of more upmarket literary thriller that came out this year, and it is about a disappearance, it's about a murder, but it's also about kind of these small town lives, it's about the characters, it's about the relationships, the kind of the socioeconomic dynamics in that town. And I think for me that's it. It's just like stuff that still has those feels of genre but is kind of very grounded in the people and their circumstances.
Okay, right. Yeah. So the sort of very detail oriented, but also quite like grounded, down to earth, which sounds like what you were kind of describing with that. And then obviously the literary aspect, how it's written.
yeah, beautiful writing or
Yeah.
smart writing, sharp writing, very kind of thoughtful writing. I think, like, for me, that's something that I always want my list to be, is writers who, whether they're in an upmarket space, a book club space, or a literary space, who are really kind of dedicated to being the best writers that they can be.
Yeah. And the general sense I get as well is that sometimes when something is literary, it can also be slower. It can have less of a pace to it because there's more kind of like build up. There's more taking the time to really develop an idea or a thought.
Yeah, and I think there can be a misconception that literary means that there isn't going to be plot, because there definitely can be so many amazing literary books that have so much plot in them. And I think for me, I love the kind of the literary novels that are more slow and atmospheric and somewhat navel-gazy. But I also love, kind of the big sweeping epic literary fiction that is really twisty and turny. So I think it's quite a wide net, and it's hard to define exactly what it is. And I think everyone struggles to define exactly.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it sounds like also just the way that you kind of preempted that was that to some degree it's a marketing decision, whether it's being positioned. Something might be on the sort of cusp and you can't decide either way, but marketing might decide that we're going to position this as literary because it makes more sense to the people we're trying to reach.
For sure. And I think that's something that happens in a lot of discussions around a book. It's like, sometimes things we might say they're published in a more literary way, they're published up. They might be sometimes there's a more kind of literary novel that's given a more commercial, wide appeal look to reach out more widely. It's just about kind of zeroing in on who those readers are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, right. And then this might be harder to define. I don't know.
Yeah.
When you say upmarket and book club fiction, how do you kind of define those in a loose sense, I guess?
I think they're really interchangeable phrases.
Yeah.
And I think, again, like upmarket is interchangeable with like accessible literary. I think for me, when I'm talking about book club stuff, I'm probably talking about books that are a bit more on the more commercial end of my list. So the writing will still be really strong, but it might not be as precise, maybe not the main point of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And a big thing with book club fiction is, you want it to have questions that you could talk about at a book club. You want it to have themes that you can pull out, themes that you can engage with, kind of meaty topics that the book's dealing with. For me, just on my list, book club just tends to be stuff that still has those really interesting themes and questions, but maybe the writing isn't the central focus, even though it still needs to be it still needs to be really strong and it still needs to be really engaging.
Okay, right. So is it almost like a scale where there's like, if you have the literary stuff and then there's sort of the accessible literary, as you called it, that kind of leans towards upmarket, and then that kind of leans towards book club?
I'd say so. But again, it really does just depend who you ask. I do think people have different takes on that.
Yeah.
But for me, I think I always want a book that feels really well written and has some really important topics that it's discussing, or meaty topics that it's discussing. In that space, I'm happy to work with books that are on the more literary end or on the more book club end. Okay, great. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way of covering it and explaining those three things. Before we head over to the desert island, it is currently the middle of May 2025. Are there any specific settings, genres, characters, or whatever it might be that you are particularly interested in adding to your list? So I feel like I really am after a kind of literary upmarket thriller. Something quite pacey and plotty, set somewhere quite interesting and atmospheric. I know that sounds incredibly vague, but I feel like I want something very twisty and kind of full of intrigue. It's been interesting because we've been having a lot of conversations. Like I said, I was in New York last week, meeting with basically, I think we had, in 4 days, we had like 36 meetings across various imprints at different publishers. And I think a big thing that came out from those meetings is that people are really looking for plots to get lost in right now. And so I think I'd love to find something really exciting and plotty, but also kind of very human and intelligent in that kind of literary thriller space.
Okay, cool. I think that's, it's broad enough that people can figure out how to fit into that, but also I think specific enough that to identify what you're looking for specifically.
I also am always looking for really good contemporary fiction. I feel like it's one of my favourite places to represent authors. So I'm always looking for more really, really good contemporary fiction. And also I watched Conclave, which I know like everyone is watching now because we've had a conclave. But I think that kind of that peek behind the curtain that conclave does so well, where you're in this very like cloistered world that you otherwise might not know very much about, and kind of learning about the politics and the dynamics of it. Like anything that does that, I'm always really excited by. Okay, right. So the sort of, well, with Conclave, it's very much, for me at least, it was like the humanizing of these sort of mythical people who you just assume are not existing like the rest of us, but are also just very human. Exactly. And like maybe just like that kind of forensic dive on sort of like how these systems are built, how they kind of keep going, and showing you the human sides of the people kind of within them. So anything like that I always find so interesting. I love those kind of books that feel like a peek behind the curtain. Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a more specific subscribed thing to look for there. I just wanted to touch on, before we get that done again, the trip to New York, is that something that you, like the team at Madeline Milburn, do you do that quite often, as in go to, like, obviously New York's far away, so I presumably you did a bunch of different publishers whilst you were there, but is it quite a normal thing for you and the team to just go to like a publisher and just kind of present your list and say, this is all the things that, I've got going with all my authors? Yeah, so a huge part of our job is meeting with publishers and understanding what they're looking for and pitching our projects to them in person. So we do that in the UK really, really regularly. Like in my week, every week I'll probably have at least like one coffee with an editor or a lunch or whatever. We often have editors coming to the office, and we'll kind of do either like a round table where we'll all meet with them, or kind of have one-to-one meetings where we'll each go in one by one and kind of pitch our list to them. Publishers kind of throw events where they invite agents in, and then we also do overseas trips, so to New York, to Frankfurt, for the Frankfurt Book Fair. There's London Book Fair, where we meet publishers from kind of all around the world, and also for our film and TV team, fly out to LA quite a lot. So yeah, I think it's such a human business, not just on the side of meeting the authors and building these really important long-lasting relationships with them, but also in terms of building really strong relationships with publishers and understanding the types of books that they're looking for. Because it can be so easy to we get wish lists in from them, so publishers might send us kind of guides as to what their individual editors want to see, but nothing kind of can replace seeing that person face to face, whether it's on Zoom or an actual person meeting, and hearing them talk about what they're looking for, hearing them talk about what's exciting them, talking about like book recommendations and movie recommendations, and like really getting to know the core of what they want on their list. Okay, right. But if you're meeting them to pitch something specific or pitch like a broad number of things, that would be separate from you being on submission with a specific manuscript or a specific author? Yeah, so the way that it works would be that, when you've got exciting submissions coming up, when you've got books that you're the edits are done, that you do with them in-house at the agency, and you're ready to start sending their books out to the world and to editors kind of on submission. In the lead up to that, I'll start having meetings with publishers that I'm really excited to send that book to kind of lay the groundwork and get them excited about this book that's coming. So that's kind of like one of the very first things we do when we're gearing up to getting a book out on submission. So that will be the kind of the direct pitching with editors. When you go for coffees with them, telling them about this book that you've got coming, kind of just laying that exciting groundwork. And then each book will go on an individual submission, which is kind of an email submission, where we literally just send the manuscript and our pitch materials directly to the editors. But that early stage of meeting editors for coffee and pitching the books before they're actually sent is a really great way to just kind of garner interest, to see if your submission list is right. Like, you've got the right people on it based on the reactions from when you pitch the book to them. Sometimes they might give you a really helpful steer and say, actually, that's not for me, but you should send it to my colleague. So it's all part of how we build up towards a submission landing on someone's desk and them already knowing about it and already being excited to see it.
Okay. Wow. There's so much goes into this, isn't it? It's not just sending emails off to people. It's, you guys are really doing a lot of groundwork before the submission even goes out to anywhere. That's great to hear. It's great to like you say, get a peek behind the curtain, because sometimes, especially in publishing, a lot of things are like not so clear to see, or like obfuscated if you're on different sides of the industry. But that's great. That's really interesting to hear about how that kind of works in a logistical sense.
For sure. And I think the reality is like there's so many books going out on submission all the time. And anything that we can do on our end before the book even lands in someone's inbox to make them be aware of it, to make them be excited that it's coming, to know how to kind of make them want to jump on it, it can make such a massive difference. Yeah,
makes perfect sense. And just makes me wonder as well how you guys like have time in the day to do all of the different things that agents need to do.
Basically, we work all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a full-on career path being an agent. We are at the point in the episode where I pack up your things and ship you off and ask you, Liv, if you were stranded on a desert island with a single book, which book do you hope that it would be?
Do you know, I spent a lot of time thinking about this question, and I spent a lot of time thinking, okay, am I looking just for like my favourite book? Am I looking for a book that like I read maybe years ago that I've always kept thinking about? Like, what is the thing that how would I approach this question? And I realised actually the way that I would approach it is just kind of like what would help me the most on a desert island. And I don't know if that's quite a practical response to it, but that's where my thinking went. So I was thinking, like, would I want to take like a short story collection so that I could go into multiple different worlds? Or would I want something like really big and sweeping so that I could, something that was like 800 pages just so I could read it for ages and ages? Or would I want something to remind me of home, so like set in London? Or something like about kind of human resolution to remind me like I can get through this? But then I thought, I think the one I would choose is Piranesi, because obviously in Piranesi, he lives in this big house and he's kind of quite isolated there, and he finds a way to go through each of these rooms every day and get a routine and like find a way to build a life in this very kind of isolated and reduced space. And I thought, well, I think I'd read that, because then that would help me to work out how I would do that if I was trapped on a desert island, and how you can like build these little routines that kind of make your life have that meaning, even when you're somewhere so kind of away from reality. So that's where I ended up.
That's great. I really like I loved hearing the thought process and the parallels you got there. I think that's great, because that book ticks a lot of those boxes for you, because I think it sort of reconnects you with the world that you're familiar with, where you've come from, but also, like you said, helps you kind of, you can mimic in part setting up those own routines for yourself. Obviously they'd be different routines, but you could be kind of living it whilst you're also experiencing it and reading it. And
also I think with Piranesi, it's like he is so happy in his routines, and and obviously towards the end you realise that there's a falsity to that. But I think that kind of in the early chapters, there's an element of like the simplicity of it is actually really comforting.
Yeah. I think that's a really cool answer. I was thinking now about if there was like another book that I would, maybe The Martian is a kind of similar thing, where it's like, it's just by himself and he's just figuring out each step. He's like, oh, okay, I need to do this. I need to do this. Yeah. I really like that. That's a great answer.
And I also just think Piranesi's got a very comforting voice. And I think that's what I'd be looking for if I was trapped on a desert island, just a really comforting voice.
Yes. Yeah. You don't want like a harsh, abrasive voice when you're by yourself. So next up, we are going to chat about submissions, queries, and cover letters. That will be in the extended episode available on patreon.com/rightandwrong.
Like how incredible that is. So yeah, not for me, but I very much love being a part of it as a third party.
Okay, great. Yeah. I mean, it's good to be inspired by all the people you're working with.
Yeah, and I think Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much, Liv, for coming on the podcast and telling us all about your kind of origins in publishing, Madeline, what's going on at Madeline Milburn, everything that's going on with you and your list. It's been really cool and really interesting chatting with you.
Thank you so much, and yeah, much appreciated.
For anyone wanting to keep up with what Liv is doing, you can follow her on Instagram at @LitAgentLiv. You can, if you're thinking about submitting to Liv or any of the team over at Madeline Milburn, you want to head over to the website madelinemilburn.co.uk, head to the submissions page, and you'll have all of the instructions and the form that's fillable online. It's all done very well, so it's very difficult for you to do it wrong. And to support the podcast, like, follow, and subscribe. Join the Patreon for ad-free extended episodes and check out my other podcast, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again to Olivia, and thanks to everyone listening. We will catch you on the next episode.